These sources you send over about medieval life, they're amazing. I always thought of castles as these grand, kind of like home sweet castle places, you know. But it turns out kings were constantly on the move.
Yeah, it's true. They were rarely in one place for too long.
They were going from castle to castle, and sometimes they even had, get this, like temporary lodgings built just for their visits. Not exactly the image we have in mind, is it?
It really changes how you think about home back then,
Mm,
especially for royalty. Castles, they were built more for protection than comfort.
right, like fortresses more than homes.
Exactly.
One source mentions St. Thomas's Tower, which is part of the Tower of London. Okay, I know it's the Tower of London, so it's got to be impressive. But still, the king's accommodation, just a hall and a bedchamber.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
And think about it. This is a time with no running water, no central heating, none of the things we take for granted. Makes you grateful, huh?
Totally.
Yeah.
Even for a king, daily life was just completely different. Speaking of different, are you ready to eat like a king?
I'm starved. What are we having?
Well, I was surprised to learn that, at least in early medieval England, rulers might have had a more, get this, plant-based diet than we usually picture.
Really? We always picture those giant feasts with tons of meat.
Right, mountains of meat. But it seems those feasts were more for special occasions, you know, to impress and strengthen alliances, not an every Tuesday kind of meal.
Makes sense. Food preservation was a whole different bowl game back then.
So no massive roasts every day for the king.
Probably not. Think about it. What was available, what they could store easily, that's what their everyday meals were. Grains, vegetables. They had to be much more tuned in to the seasons.
Yeah, no popping down to the supermarket for them. So what were they eating regularly then? All bread and water.
One source talked about this dish called frumenti.
Frumenti, okay.
It's a type of wheat porridge cooked in meat broth, seasoned with spices. Apparently, it was a pretty common dish throughout the medieval period.
Interesting, so kind of like our oatmeal or grits, although I don't know about that meat broth part.
Maybe not for everyone's taste today.
What do you think? Would you trade all our modern comforts to live like a king back then?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's easy to romanticize the power, the prestige. But could I handle no indoor plumbing? No central heating? I think I'd miss a good cup of coffee even more.
You read my mind. Give me my morning coffee or give me nothing. And let's not forget modern plumbing. Speaking of which, let's get into how people in the Middle Ages handled hygiene, no showers, limited running water.
Yeah.
Sounds rough, but the sources you sent over talk about surprisingly advanced hygiene practices for the time.
It's true. They took hygiene surprisingly seriously. For example, even back then, they knew how important hand washing was for health.
So, ahead of the curve in some ways. But what about baths? Did they even take baths? So they were washing their hands, that's good. But I'm still stuck on the bath thing. What about those medieval bathhouses you always hear about? Were those actually a thing?
Oh, yeah. Bathhouses were everywhere, especially in larger towns and cities. And, they were a big social thing, too.
Okay, so not just about getting clean.
Not at all. It was a chance to relax, chat with friends, even do a little business on the side.
I like it. A medieval spa day, but with extra socializing.
Exactly.
Okay, so they bathed at least sometimes, but did they have anything like our shampoos and lotions?
Believe it or not, their beauty routines were pretty advanced. I mean, one source said they used rose oil as perfume.
Ooh, that's nice.
Right.
Anything a little less appealing?
Well, apparently cat waste was a popular choice for hair removal.
Oh, no, you're
I
kidding.
know, right?
Okay, maybe not all their beauty secrets were winners.
Yeah, you win some, you lose some. But here's something else interesting. Hum monks, you know those guys. One source said they were considered kind of unhygienic even for the Middle Ages.
Wait, really? Monks? Why is that?
It's wild, right? It seems like they saw, dirtiness and discomfort as, a way to show humility, a reminder that the body is temporary or something.
Wow, I guess every era has its own ideas about what clean means.
Mm.
Do you think there are any medieval hygiene practices, besides the bathhouses, that we could learn from today?
Well, their focus on hand washing was definitely spot on, way ahead of their time on that one. And, maybe there's something to be said for their acceptance of a little healthy dirt, They were outside more, working with their hands.
Yeah, I get that.
But I think we can all agree that the cat waste thing is best left in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On that note, let's move from hygiene to something a little more glamorous. Let's talk about clothes. I'm picturing lush fabrics, vibrant colors. But didn't they have all those rules about what people could wear? Tell me about these sumptuary laws. What were those all about?
Ah, yes. Sumptuary laws. Think of it like fashion legislation, medieval style. They were all about controlling what people could wear based on their social status.
So even if you had the money to dress like a king, you couldn't.
Exactly. It was about keeping those social divisions clear.
Wow. That's so interesting. It just goes to show how important clothes were as a way of showing your place in society. What sort of rules are we talking about?
Well, certain fabrics, like really nice ones like velvet or fur, were often only for the wealthy. And get this, they even had rules about how pointy your shoes could be.
Are you serious? Too pointy, and you're in trouble.
Yep, they took their fashion seriously back then.
It's incredible how fashion and social status have always been connected. Even today, you know?
Oh, totally. We don't have laws about shoe points, but think about dress codes for work or school. Even within different friend groups, there are these unspoken rules about what's cool to wear or what's appropriate. It's a fascinating parallel, isn't it?
Totally. We might think we're more individualistic in our fashion choices today, but those social signals are still there, just in a different form. Makes you wonder what else we've inherited from the Middle Ages without realizing it. Speaking of inheritance, what about the knowledge they passed down? What did medieval folks know about the world around them? How did it compare to what we know now? So we've talked about castles, food, even how they kept or didn't keep clean. But what about, like, their understanding of the world? What did they actually know back then?
You know, it might surprise you, medieval kings, at least a lot of them, they were actually very well educated.
Oh, really?
By the standards of the time, of course. They usually had tutors, learned about Latin, military strategy, diplomacy, law. You know, the skills you need to run a kingdom.
Right, medieval political science. But what about everyone else? The average person? What kind of knowledge did they have access to?
For most people, knowledge was much more practical. It was all about what you needed for daily life. They learned trades, farming techniques, herbal remedies. You know, they were incredibly resourceful, had this really deep understanding of the natural world.
Had to be, right? No hardware stores or anything.
Exactly.
But did they have any sense of the wider world beyond their own communities? Or was it all very, like, localized?
Well, it's funny. People often think everyone in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat.
Right, right.
They knew it was a sphere.
Oh, okay.
They did. They actually had a pretty good grasp of astronomy and geography for the time, even if their maps weren't exactly Google Maps.
Busting myths left and right. It shows how easily we can misjudge people from the past, you know? One of the sources you sent, it had this thought experiment. It asked, what if you took a modern person, just plopped them right into the Middle Ages? What skills would be most valuable?
Oh, that's a good one. Really makes you think about what we consider essential now versus then. Like that source said, knowing how to farm, build something, even basic first aid, way more useful than, say, being able to code a website.
Seriously, suddenly my ability to create a killer PowerPoint presentation doesn't seem quite as impressive. What about you? What skill would you bring to the table if you were suddenly in medieval times?
Ooh, tough one. I mean, I hope my history knowledge would give me a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, a little bit.
But honestly, I'd miss all our modern conveniences. How about you? What would you miss the most?
Oh, easy, all the conveniences. Can't imagine life without my coffee maker. But, hey, maybe I could put my storytelling skills to use around a medieval campfire. Become the next great bard, you know?
Now, that would be a story for the history books.
It would. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of medieval kings, it's clear that the reality was way more complicated than the fairy tales. They had power, sure, but their lives were also full of these challenges that we can barely even imagine today.
So true. It's a good reminder that history is never simple, and that even those who seem to have it all, they're dealing with their own unique situations.
Well said. Now, before we go, I've got one last kind of strange thought for you to ponder. The sources mentioned this role, the groom of the stool. Apparently, this was a super important person in the king's household.
The groom of the stool.
Yeah. What do you think that job was all about? And why was it considered so important? Think about that, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.